And hello everybody, my name is Lucy and welcome to Books and Brushes. So today I'm doing my September and October wrap up. Yes, I never did one at the end of September because whoops. I only read 2 books in that month, so I just kind of rolled it on to the next month. And now there's 7 books to talk about, so let's just get into this. So the 2 books I read in September were Hunger by Michael Grant and The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. Let's start with Hunger, the second book in the Gone series by Michael Grant, which me, Nikki and Brandon are all reading as a big buddy read. If you've been on my channel at any point recently, you've probably heard me talk about this more often than not. We are buddy reading this series together where we read 1 book a month, and I'm absolutely loving it so far. Gone was brilliant. It set up the series so magnificently. As its own separate entity, it was great. Hunger got so much darker and so much more depraved and desperate. There were some real creepy moments. There was desperation just oozed out of this story. There were some characters I really hated. I just remember messaging Brandon and being like, I hate Zil. I hate him. So Hunger was a great continuation to that series, and obviously I've got another Michael Grant book to talk about, but I might as well talk about that now. Okay, so the first book I read in October was Lies by Michael Grant. So this was the 3rd installment, and again this book it took it in a whole new direction with the lies and the whole splitting and internal conflict between Sam and Astrid and the council. It was, again, this book, I don't know how Michael Grant's doing it, but this series is like, I don't know, how many books long? It's like a 6-book series, and every single book, every single chapter is intense and thrilling and thought-provoking and engaging, and I'm still like super invested in this story, even though we're like on book 3. He's always got new ways to spice it up, new characters to add, new dangers to face, new conflicts and different parties wrestling for each other. Again, Zil. There is so much to love about this series, and one of my favourite things is actually getting to read it with other people, because I'm messaging Nikki and Brandon, we've got like this group chat, and it's just so much fun that every time I read something in these books I can message them and be like, oh my god, this just happened. And that's a really, really fun thing to do. I actually read some of this book in a McDonald's and I was like, hey, it's like Albert. Like, now I can't see a McDonald's without thinking, Albert should be running that. If you've not read this book, I'm sure you're very confused what I'm talking about. But you know, you just have to read it, won't you? So the second book I read in September, and the only other book I read in September, was The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. This book was the perfect fall book to read. I've mentioned it before, the colours and the vibes of this book, very, very autumnal. I love this book. It was a difficult book to read in the sense that there were so many perspectives, and it's a gigantic puzzle that's supposed to screw with your brain, you know? This book is about this manor house party, and our main character wakes up in a new body every single day. And they only have a limited amount of days and a limited amount of characters that they have to live through the day to try and solve the murder of Evelyn Hardcastle. So at 11 PM every night she dies, and you've got to figure it out and bring this information to your captor so that you can be released from this hellish place. It's full of mystery and complete confusion. Like, you think you know something, oh no you don't. Like any book or media that tries to tackle with time travel, there is so much element of what? Like, you'll receive a note telling you to do something and you'll realise that you wrote that note 3 days in the future. You're just living through these days trying to get through it, and you as the reader are also trying to piece it together, and it's exciting, it's confusing, it was difficult at times, like I said, because you really got to think, you know, this isn't a passive read, this isn't a, oh, I'm going to sit back and chill, this is a, right, brain, you must engage now, because you are trying to solve a murder as 5 people, and you're dying every now and then just to make things a bit more difficult. And do you trust these characters? I wouldn't trust anyone at this point. If you want a murder mystery that's absolutely filled with magic and horror and suspense and confusion, this is the book for you. Essentially Groundhog Day, in case any of you are still left wondering. It's a great book. It screws with your brain, and I think it's supposed to. Another friend of mine actually read this, and she said to me, like, how confused and frustrating it could be to read. And I was talking with her about it, and I said, yeah, the author is trying to frustrate and confuse you just as how the character feels, that you are going through this with the character. And she was like, oh my god, yeah, I didn't think of it that way. That's what good authors do. They put you in the character's shoes wholeheartedly, and you really feel for this character because you don't know who you are, you don't know where you come from, you don't know anything, and you're just trying to piece it together. You're like a newborn baby in the world. You have to trust everybody and you shouldn't trust anybody. And it's a really intriguing, interesting book. It did take me a long time to read, aka most of September, but I really enjoyed it nonetheless, and I'm glad I read it. Okay, so in October I read Lies, which I've already talked about, and then next I read, actually the next one was an audiobook, and that was Michael McIntyre's A Life and Laughing. Now I've already filmed a video where I'm going to talk about this, but I haven't yet posted it, so you can look forward to that in the future. I talk about that book in great depth in that video, so I'm not going to just reiterate and regurgitate everything I said, only for you to see it again a week or so later. But if you want to know all my thoughts on this, keep an eye out for my biography collection video, which will be coming out soon. Essentially what you need to know is, I've read this book before as a physical book, and recently I was working and I needed something to listen to, so I decided to listen to the audiobook. And I absolutely loved the audiobook, getting to actually hear Michael McIntyre say his own words, and it's been a long time since I read this story, so it was really great to be back in this book. It's a very feel-good, happy-go-lucky, funny kind of book. So I really love this book, and keep an eye out for that future video where I talk more about it. I've been getting more and more into audiobooks, which is really fun, and so next book I read was also an audiobook, and that was Animal Farm by George Orwell. Now, I've always wanted to crack the George Orwell books, but never got around to it, and then I got the audiobook for it, and I thought, you know what, let's just give it a try while I work. I really enjoyed it. It was never a book I studied. I mean, I knew of the book, and I knew the historical parallel significance. I think it was mentioned in a class or so, but I never studied it properly. I really enjoyed the slow build up of, you can see the corruption happening, and it's bit by bit, and I love the way that George made it into this farm. Like, it made perfect sense. The way he plotted it out, and the way he made the pigs, you know, rise, and the way that they would spin it to make it sound good, and how they got away with a bit more and a bit more, just ever so slightly each time, until they were in full corruption and they became the humans from the beginning. It was a lovely circle. I thought it was a fun, entertaining book, very intelligent, very wry. I had a lot of fun with it, and I enjoyed the parallels, and it was, you know, quite sad. There's a lot of sad moments, and there was a lot of foreshadowing, and I could sense when certain characters were kind of doomed. It was quite sad in parts, but very thought-provoking and effortless in the way that it was told, and I really enjoyed the story. The narrator was also really good for that book. I don't know who narrated it. I will have to check it out, and if I figure it out, I can get it here for you. His voice was really gravelly and really made the story come to life. Even though Animal Farm is quite famous, Animal Farm is about an animal farm who was once in the hands of the humans until the animals decided they'd had enough. They didn't want to keep working to the bone and only receiving pittance in return, and they wanted to overthrow the horrible greedy humans that were using them and abusing them. So they did. They run the humans out and decided to run the farm themselves, and it's a story of slow corruption. It mirrors a lot of history, and it details and shows how the corruption can begin and how a dictator can rise, and it's a really fun book. I bet most of you probably know of it, but I'd never read it before, and I'm glad I did. Now, the next book I read was also a buddy read, but no, not the Gone series. This one I read with my good friend Rachel over at Rachel's Reading Corner. We decided to buddy read a book, and this is the one we chose. The Burning by Laura Bates. I think I mentioned it in a video of mine recently, and Laura was like, oh, I really want to read that too. So we both read it, and that was, again, really fun to be able to just chat with her back and forth. We pretty much kept a similar pace with the book. I think I was ahead and then she pulled ahead. I almost don't want to tell you what it's about because the blurb is very mysterious, and I feel like that's how you're supposed to go into the book. However, I can't really talk about this book without kind of spoiling everything that... It's a difficult one. The non-spoilery version is that this book is about a girl who moves and her whole social media life is completely deleted. Her name been changed. She's moved to get away from a horrible incident that happened, but it follows her, and it's the story of her torment through this. That's kind of all I'm going to say, unless you want to hear the details. So skip to this part in the video if you want to read this book, because I do recommend it. It's such a great book. But if you want to go into it without knowing a single thing, you can skip to there. You're welcome. Okay, so now I'm going to go into some spoilers because I just have to talk about this book in more detail. So, and you're following Anna, and she's moved up to Scotland, which was also really fun because I love books that are set in the UK because British. So it's always fun culturally for me to see my world represented, because you know a lot of books are set in America. It's fun to see my culture, you know, in a book. So one kid even sets up a profile from her dead dad and posts stuff like, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm dead so I don't have to be embarrassed for my slag of a daughter." And the gut punches this book delivers, I swear to God, there were so many moments where I felt physically sick just having to read what people were putting her through. And not just by stupid kids. Her friends ditched her because they didn't want to be social pariahs as well. Now all of the teachers were blaming it on her, as well as, you know, the parents, like everyone. She can't go anywhere without this, you know, coming up to bite her. She just meets a gardener and she's like, "Oh, my daughter goes to school with some slags. Oh, it's so good you're a good girl." And she's like, "That's me." Like, she cannot escape it. It is inescapable. And this feeling of being completely trapped, completely and utterly overwhelmed by a sea of hatred. Honestly, it was a difficult book to read. I was so anxious and on the verge of tears pretty much the whole time. One of the great things I did love about this story as well is there's a historical element. So while she's going through all of this, she's doing a history project, and she manages to find out about this girl who was tried for being a witch. And she has all these like kind of visions and dreams, and she finds this necklace. And so there's like historical magical realism element to it as well, which is a really interesting thing to weave into the story. That was really, really fun, because you also get perspectives from this woman who was living, you know, back in Scotland in the 1800s or whatever it was. And it's so brilliant how the author has directly put these two stories of these two girls next to each other, because their stories are remarkably similar. So the woman who was tried for being a witch, she was basically raped and impregnated by a noble, and you know, she gets pregnant. The whole town's blasphemous, having a child out of wedlock. So she is completely degraded and humiliated and punished. She obviously tells everyone that she was raped and it was his fault, but no one believes her, not a soul. And then they completely punish and degrade her, and she becomes a complete pariah of society. Is this sounding familiar? And then he dies at sea, and she gets blamed for being a witch because, you know, everyone knows she hated him. So they burn her at the stake. And yeah, one of them gets completely tortured and burned. But then again, it's not that different from the story of this modern girl. In all that time between these two time periods, we're supposed to be living in this modern progressive society, and yet the exact same thing is happening to this girl. The exact same thing. She has been completely victimized and no one is on her side. Like, how is society telling everyone that this is right? And there are so many good points brought up in this book, which is why this is such an important story. This story is so important because it analyses society in a way it needs to be shown, and it highlights it and says, look, this ain't right, is it? So yes, it may be a very difficult book to read. However, I really recommend it. If you love things that are difficult, But if you also love things that have a message and that really say something, that really want to make a change, this is a book. Because I read this book and this book has impacted me, and not many books, you know, impact you in that way. But yeah, so I do recommend this book. Obviously there's going to be a lot of trigger warnings, so do check those out beforehand. This book is so important, and well done Laura Bates for writing this. And thanks Rachel for reading it with me. It was so good to have someone there that we could both be like, well shit, this is some heavy stuff. It was so good to be able to talk about it and like really connect with someone over that message and that story, and you know, analyse not only the book but how it applies to real life as well. And the last book I read in October, which slightly bled into November because I finished it this morning, and that is The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein by Kiersten White. I had to read this over Halloween, I think. Last October I read Frankenstein, and as you know, didn't go to plan. I have so many conflicting, mixed and negative, you know, connotations with that time and that period last year when reading Frankenstein. Internal, external, just all the things. And then you would know that I had a major slump after that book, and this book I was hoping would not do the same. I loved this book. This was what I wanted Frankenstein to be. This was such a good retelling in my opinion. Now, bearing in mind I'm coming from a place where I wasn't quite happy with Frankenstein. I love the story, the concept, the questions, the moral ambiguity of that book, the chilling and gross vibes and the intellectual spirit of that book, I loved. And that's what I wanted. However, it was also my first ever classic that I read, and it was filled with so much filler and boredom, honestly. Like, it was quite tedious for me personally to read. So this book is a modern written book. Obviously it's still set in the same time period, still got the same characters, it's pretty much the same story but retold in a way that suits the modern writing. And I absolutely love the way she tackled it. So she tackled it from Elizabeth's perspective, and I don't remember exactly the original, but I'm pretty sure the same events happened, but I could be wrong. But she writes it from a totally different perspective, and I absolutely love it. I love the characters, I love the writing, I just loved everything about it. It was such a dark, chilling story. It had all that moral ambiguity with none of the filler. And if you love Halloween, if you love the dark and depraved, you love manipulative and sneaky characters, if you love all things dark, then this is the book. I absolutely loved it, absolutely more than I wanted it to be, and I'm so grateful. At the end of this book, Kiersten White had a whole like couple of pages where she talked about how much she loved Mary Shelley and how much respect she had for her and how she really wanted to do this story justice. Yeah, she's right, for Mary Shelley, you know, a teenage girl to write such an impactful book, a book that we still talk about. Frankenstein is so relevant in popular culture. That's impressive. That book to have survived for so long and still be so relevant and so important to today is a magnificent achievement. And you could tell that Kiersten White really wanted to write this and respect it, but I preferred it written in this way, and I absolutely love this book. And if you love Frankenstein, I'd really be interested to see what you think of this, because I think you'd like it as well, but then again, it's an iffy one, I'm not sure. So I really enjoyed this book, and it is a great book to read at Halloween because obviously. And those are the books I read in September and October. Thank you so much for watching. As you may have seen, yeah, my October TBR. I knew it was ambitious, but wow, I didn't get to as many scary books as I wanted. In fact, I read one, you know, Michael McIntyre's Life and Laughing and Animal Farm, but they were audio books, so give me credit. I managed to read a couple of the ones I set my mind to, and it's okay. I will still get to read them, hopefully soon. So many good buddy reads this month, and so many good books I need to get to.